I was born in Nebraska. My mother's sister lived here. Her first husband had died and she married a miner, and they moved to Grass Valley in '32. He went to work in the mines. She kept after my mother by phone and letter. You have to come out here because there's no depression here. Everybody's making money. Mines are all flourishing. Miners are making $5 a day and stealing 10. So we moved here in August of, 35, I guess.
I came here because of the job. I sort of had to look up Nevada County.
Thomas Cole was a ship captain. He came to San Francisco with his ship and crew during the gold rush. The crew, as soon as they got to San Francisco, heard about the gold rush, they jumped ship and they went gold mining. He no longer had a crew, couldn't move the ship, so somehow he ended up in Bridgeport. And he married my great-grandmother, Victoria Cole.
I actually saw a picture of her grandfather in one of the Nevada County books.
Yeah.
Painting for gold on Deer Creek.
Oh, well,
in a suit.
In a suit.
In a suit is probably like after church or something.
My great-grandfather on my mom's side, he died in a mining accident in 1890 in Smartsville. He was the head of a mining operation that was mining deep underneath the South Yuba, or the Yuba River, as we crossed that big long bridge on Highway 20 heading to Marysville, Yuba City.
In 1884, they abolished hydraulic gold mining. You couldn't hydraulic gold mine anymore. Well, the family was still out there, that was their living. So they hydraulic mined at night. And my grandmother, Lida Ogden, she was in the grammar school and the feds came. And they had derby hats. And she said to them, they go, "Are you the feds?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I gotta go tell my grandfather and my father and all my uncles that you're in town because they're mining at night."
My grandfather, who was a hoist master, and that was supposed to have been the best paying job in the mine because it had the most responsibility, lowering the miners down and back up along with the ore carts. And they had the bell system, and they'd ring the bell so he knew what level they were at in the mine. And this one check is for $71.20. The other check is for $80.70. Now, I never knew if that was a month's pay, but I'm thinking it's a month.
And on the other side of the road, go up to the highway, there was the Spring Hill mine. We could only go in there on Sundays and sneak into the burner, and there'd be all these hot coals, and we'd throw stuff in there, and those flames would shoot up, and stuff like that.
I did remember as a little boy in Grass Valley going there, and when you go to the show, it would tremble the theater because of the stamp mills running down into Pennsylvania. See,
it was a very, very noisy place. There were 80 stamps, and each one of those stamps weighed 1,750 pounds, and they came down 65 to 75 times a minute. If any one of those stamps had not done as it was supposed to do, crush the rock with that speed and that weight, it would have had the whole community awake and wondering what had happened, you know.
You know, we've always talked about Grass Valley being the working man's town. In Nevada City, house the courthouses and the owners of the mines enjoyed Nevada City a little bit better than listening to the stamp mill down here 24 hours a day, I'm sure. But I think Nevada City has everything in the world to be proud of because of their history, and Grass Valley as well. They're just different, came from different roots, but all the same.
That's how 4th of July parades were here for us growing up. I mean, it was a time where you would see everybody you knew on the same day.
Yeah.
And at least for me, I remember we never went to the parade when it was in Grass Valley. Hardly ever.
No.
It was like sacrilegious. You would go to the parade when it was in your town only. And then the other thing they used to do when we were kids, it was great fun, at the bottom of Broad Street, right by the, was the brewery, what is it now?
Oh, the Stone House?
The
they
Stone
call it
House,
now?
yeah.
Where
So the
Smokey's
two,
Golf used to
yeah,
be there.
right, the two fire departments from the two towns would have a water fight.
The fire department would have their water fight down at the end of the plaza, and that was, and people get soaked, and they didn't care. It was a lot of fun watching them, and it was,
Didn't they have a big ball that they were pushing back and forth?
yes.
They did that on Spring Street, I remember as a little girl. The two fire departments at each end of Spring Street in Nevada City, and they had this big round ball. It had to have been rubber or something, and the firemen would, with their hoses, would push it back and forth, and so I'm sure the
Water would be diverted.
oh yeah, but they would be trying to push it from one end to the other, kind of like a tug of war, only with this big rubber ball. But people were soaking wet. I mean, it was great.
Actually, the only time we noticed there was a rivalry is when the Nevada City High School played the Grass Valley High School in football games. That was the biggest thing. I mean, it wasn't that much. It was just because it had been, we thought it should still continue to be, is the way I feel it was. But it was fun.
My mother was a cheerleader with Norma Galino for Grass Valley, and there was a big rivalry game coming up between the two towns. My mom and Norma made up this cheer. There ain't no flies on us. There ain't no flies on us. There may be flies on Nevada City High, but there ain't no flies on us. The next day, they were called into the principal's office for that, because that was unsportsmanlike.
We were really friends. I mean, whether we were supposed to be or not, we were. I don't think the rivalry was that much. Not in that I can remember anyway, except on the football games. But of course it's like that with the Giants and the A's right now, so what's the difference? I mean, that's part of life, I guess.
There's another area of Nevada County life that people don't talk about much, but there used to be gang fights between Grass Valley and Nevada City. And I was just old enough to actually go to one of the last ones.
Towards the end of it, yeah.
There were the Grass Valley kids, and there were us Nevada City kids, and they had chains, they had bottles, they had fisticuffs, the whole 9 yards. I was there, I watched it start, and I kind of just went and hid behind a tree. It was like, I'm not a fighter, never have been, and it scared the bejesus out of me, and I thought, oh God, I hope I don't have to do this when I get into high school.
It was called Cashy Field, and the boys from Grass Valley would come over, and the young boys from Nevada City, and they would have fisticuffs. They would really fight. They had terrible battles. I couldn't believe it. Of course, as a girl, I was not involved, but my brothers were. Not the oldest brother, because he was always the good one of the family.
You see, before they had a joint union
High school, there was two high schools.
there was two high schools. There was the Empire High School in Grass Valley, and then there was Seven Hills High School in Nevada City.
But they were called Nevada City and Grass Valley High
Grass Valley.
Schools.
So these kids did not like each other. I mean, it was the classic West Side Story kind of thing.
Rivalry.
So Nevada City and Grass Valley were two total different towns. It was like being in Nevada City and Sacramento. Nobody knew anything about the Grass Valley people, and nobody knew anything about the Nevada City people.
I live in Nevada City, and when my mom was alive, it was still hard for her to come to my house because she was coming to Nevada City. She just did not like the town.
Grass Valley was settled first, and it was settled by a group of miners called the Boston Company. And that was the first very small community that started in Grass Valley. But Nevada City started with a store over on Nevada Street where the Trinity Church is now. And this man, Caldwell, had a store farther down Deer Creek. And so they called this one Caldwell's Upper Store. And then they called it Deer Creek Dry Diggings, because the gold find was not as good as it was rumored to be. And so a lot of people that come to this area to look for their ancestors, that, oh yes, he mined in Grass Valley or Nevada City. Well, he might have come here, but he probably wasn't here for very long and moved on for better pickings.
Our great-grandfather ran a sawmill there in the 1870s through the early 1880s, cut timbers for the mines. But he originally came in seeking gold, came out during the gold rush, but was quick to learn that he wasn't going to make a good living gold mining because the 49ers on Shady Creek splits our ranch in half. And 49ers pretty well had Shady Creek mined out before he got hold of Shady Creek.
My grandfather on the ranch at Indian Springs had a few pine trees down there, and he bought the ranch, and of course in those days you had to clear the ranches for grazing and for anything that the cattle or sheep to run on. And of course pine trees aren't a very good thing for grazing, so a man by the name of Moore Seaman come in there and took the timber off of our ranch there at Indian Springs. And when he did it, it amazed me. He took an Army 6x6, six-wheel drive truck. He had an A-frame on the back of it, and he would back up to these logs that were laying on the ground, of course cutting 16-foot lengths, and he'd drag them over under a tree and hoist them up there and put them on a truck. Well, at that same time, we didn't have any equipment at the ranch. Everything was done with horsepower. They cut the hay, they hauled it into the barn, we drug it into the barn with a Jackson fork for the winter hay for the cattle. And I had talked my dad into buying a hay baler. So we went to Marysville and we bought a case hay baler, and we couldn't have a very good way to pull that hay baler, so we bought a Army half-track, and I pulled the hay baler around our ranch and quite a few of the other ranches around there, baling hay, so that you could put it in the barn in bales or sell it. So that's how I got into the logging business. After I saw Morris Seaman doing it with that 6x6, and I said, boy, if Morris Seaman can skid logs with a 6x6, I can skid more logs with a half-track. So we drug all those logs into that sawmill. So that was the very start of getting in the sawmill, I wasn't in the sawmill business, but in the logging business.
First time I ever met John Casey, he had a sawmill up in, what's the name of the town up in North San Juan? Not a town, it's a little community. I sold him a full-page ad and had to run a proof up there. And he commuted back and forth from, he lived down on up on Banner. Same thing, I sold Lola Robinson a full-page ad in that section.
We had a sawmill right up by our house, the Spring Hill Sawmill, but working 6 days a week, you know, the buzz of the saw going meant prosperity. You know, a few of them where Yuba River was a sawmill, or Meeks, it was Meeks after that. You know, that was a sawmill they had, and they still got their big burner there. B&C, the True Value, you know, the Fowlers, they had a sawmill, and you know, and that closed down. All they did was sell lumber after that.
Julie was a little stinker. She was very active. She hasn't changed at all. When she was a little girl, we lived in one end of town and in the new house, and sawmill was up on the hill on the other side. It was about a mile apart, and she took her little sandbag bucket with a shovel, and she walked, and she couldn't have been more than 2 years old. She walked all the way, well, she was 2.5 because Lawrence was, I had Lawrence at that time. She walked all the way up to the sawmill by herself to her daddy. And as she entered the sawmill property, the sawmill men closed on the mill, just like that. And Frank come running out and said, and they pointed to Julia.
There was the Spring Hill Sawmill, the Brunswick Mill, the Bohemia Mill out there. I mean, you couldn't drive anywhere in Nevada County and not get behind a logging truck. And, you know, people just put up with that because that was commerce. That was money coming to the area.
Just this side of Casa Gonzales was the Caffey and Rice sawmill, and the sawmill was still operating when I was a kid, and some of the time when you'd be driving up the street, you would have to stop and wait because the loader had to back out into Gracie Road to load the logs on the track to send them into the mill. So they literally had to back into the road to get it onto the tracks to go into the saw. So, and they operated, when did they close down Caffey and Rice sawmill?
Oh, golly, I've forgotten. It's been a while.
When the sawmill started closing, it was pretty, I think that was almost as devastating as the mines closing. You know, the mines closing was sort of corresponded with the end of World War II. And so it was, you know, there's a lot of other things going on.
My husband went into the service, and he was in, I think there were 6 or 8 from Nevada County that went. By then the war was really settling down to being almost over. So anyway, he was only in the service for about 22 months, so that was kind of nice too. So while he was in the service, I went to work at the Plaza Grocery, which is now Lefty's wonderful food establishment. And at that time it was a very large grocery store. On the very lower floor they sold all kinds of grain for your critters, for your cows, for your chickens, whatever. The next floor they had all kinds of groceries. And on the top floor, where you would go up on an elevator, is where they kept all the things that were very hard to get unless you had food stamps, like cigarettes, and all those things were kept on the top floor that were locked up. It was a fun time, but it was a hard time. There were so many things you couldn't get that you thought you needed, but you found out you could do without.
When we were brought into the war very suddenly and disastrously with Pearl Harbor in December of '41, almost the next day the War Production Board issued orders to get everybody into the war effort. They were either in the service or if they had to be working in a company that had a productive war effort. Gold was not one of those things, and so they issued an order called L208 for the immediate close of all of the gold mines. That's why they closed. They didn't close because there wasn't gold. They closed because of the defense that we had put out to be sure we won this war. When the war was over, the order was lifted, and the mines gradually got back into production. But by that time it was costing $39 an ounce to get gold out to the market. And by law, the government capped the price at $35 an ounce. Well, you can't run a business losing $4 an ounce. And they all closed, one by one, and they were all closed by '56 when the Empire closed.
I think that my favorite landmark is probably the Empire Mine because of its historic significance and its beauty, and I think it's just a great fact to have inside the city limits of Grass Valley. It's just awesome.
On the weekend in Nevada City, I saw this big billboard outside the Empire Mine, and it was a for sale sign. Well, I at the time worked for a very prominent person in the Assembly of the California Legislature, and I went back to him and said that the people of this community, the paper, the Kiwanis Club, everybody recognizes this beautiful property, that it looks like a park now anyhow, should be part of the park system as a souvenir of the greatest part of California history. He said, okay, you go upstairs to William Penn Mott, who was the head of the Department of Parks and Recreation, and get him on board, and I will see that you get the money.
we could ride our bikes through the woods up to Empire Mine. And there was a fence on Empire Street you could go under into the mine property. And the only other man there was a Chinese gardener and the goldfish. It was beautiful. When I got older, I'd go up there, lay on the grass and read and do my homework. It was quiet, it was peaceful.
Obviously, as with many other people, we have a real interest in the Empire Mine. My dad worked there as a young man and used to take us there, and you know, we're very glad that is as preserved as it is in a really fine state.
I love it, I'm proud of it. And every time I go by this sign. Okay.
I worked for a lawyer across the street, a little white building over here. His name was Frank Finnegan, and one of his clients was Lyman Gilmore. And when Mr. Gilmore came to visit his lawyer, it was a sight to behold. A greasy old felt hat, a long old overcoat. He was a real town character.
There's a lot of history written about Lyman Gilmore. He was very key in the gold mines and developed a lot of machinery that he had patented, but he also had a very keen interest in aviation at a time when nobody else did. He was building gliders and pulling them with horses before the turn of the century. He developed and designed airplanes which were to be steam powered because there was no efficient gas engine available at that time. He had grandiose visions of 8-passenger airplanes powered by steam and monoplanes and things like that, and he's actually rumored to have flown before the Wright brothers.
Pathé News made a little 15-minute film of him. He and his brother were up on a ladder by the plane, and they took a broom and hit the plane, and the dust flew like everything. It had just been stored in there for years and years and years. And of course, whether he really flew or not is still a question.
One of them still here, Nevada County Airport. Nevada City Airport is gone, and Gilmore Field, where Gilmore School is gone. And so I've always had an interest in flying. My brother learned to fly at Nevada City in 1937, and I learned to fly at Gilmore Field in 1947. So those were always dear to my heart.
This airport, which was abandoned throughout World War II into the early 50s, was acquired by the Litton family upon moving up here in 1956. The California Department of Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service at the same time were pioneering aerial firefighting using surplus aircraft from World War II that were inexpensive, bringing them up here and fitting them with large tanks to bombard forest fires from the air. So they partnered with Litton and with the community and began some of the very early air tanker operations at this airport as well.
We would go up to the airport occasionally. I remember laying on the side of the airport when they first brought the WWII planes in, and they would take off, and you know, we'd sneak up on the backside and we're laying right along that runway, and those big old 2-engine planes go by with their engines roaring, and it was like, wow, I've never heard anything. It's like rolling thunder. And that was really cool.
Growing up on Grandview Terrace, we were right under the flight path of some of the most incredible airplanes I'd ever seen in my life. Big 4-engine bombers, twin-engine bombers, loud, dramatic, exciting, right over the house. And my father, who had served in World War II, had quite a library of books on history of these airplanes. And so I would ask him, Dad, what was that? And he would say, well, that's an F-7F Tiger Cat. That's a TBM Avenger. That was a World War II torpedo bomber. Well, what's it doing flying out of Grass Valley? Well, you know, they're Borate bombers now.
When Gilmore Airport was open at where the school is now, Delro Tower, and then there was a big redwood tree at the Medicine House, right catty corner of this house, and our big old tree. The plane used to line up at the Delro Tower and the big redwood tree and our oak tree and fly through it, and that's how they line up to the airfield, so we always had planes, what little planes we had at that time, fly over our house.
Stu Carson, who is a resident on the airport here, his father was Errol McBoyle's pilot, and his father flew from this airport beginning in 1933, flying gold from the Idaho, Maryland mines straight to the San Francisco Mint. And so Stu remembers as a kid growing up here, living in the old Idaho, Maryland mines, and coming up here, and his father would be flying the gold for McBoyle on a routine basis.
They trained at Mather and became friendly with many people up here. So they got into a routine that when they left to go to the Pacific area, they would come up and buzz town, their friends, and let them know they were leaving. The one came up one day, made a few passes, took off about 8 or 10 feet of the right wingtip, laid over and went right down Pleasant Street and went into a grove of pine trees across from Mount St. Mary's, and which was very close to their nunnery, but it didn't go into that. And it hit those trees and exploded, and it was a terrible boiling fire. They were full of gas. They had incendiary bombs for some reason or another on the plane, and it was spectacular, but it was terrible. And I lived on Brighton Street, which was only a couple blocks away, and I ran over there, and because I figured I could help. I had my Boy Scout uniform on because I was practicing with my mother, and I figured, well, I'm all official. I got my uniform on. I can go over there and maybe help direct people or something. And so it was just a terrible, terrible thing to see.
Later on, when we were older and we danced a lot, we went to Lake Olympia, where they had this wonderful dance floor in the middle of the lake with a tree growing up in the middle and the walkway going across. They had a swimming pool with a very high diving board that was cemented in, and they had bathhouses. My father one of his relatives had drowned in the Yuba River, so he didn't want us girls to be near water, especially the rivers. So none of us had a bathing suit. So when we went to Lake Olympia, we had to rent a bathing suit. Believe me, that was not fun. They were wool. They had a round neck, of course. They were built quite modestly, with a big number on it because you had to return them. But itch, oh wow, they were horrible. But we could not, my father would not allow us to have a bathing suit because he didn't want us any place unless we were very well supervised. So we rented the wool bathing suit.
Lake Olympia is out in the Glenbrook Basin, and people have a really difficult time locating it. In the basin, I can't remember the name of the street, but you go that way, there's a Goodyear store, tire store right there. Directly across the street, you can see a little mound of dirt with some tire tracks that go up over it, and if you take that, which I've done several times, if you take that, it goes back down into the Olympia Basin.
So you're still too young though to remember the old lake.
I'm too old to remember.
You don't remember Lake
Olympia. Yeah, and all
yeah,
that.
all of that, and the racetrack out that way. I mean, it's a whole nother world. It was just magical. My mom used to go out there and swim. They'd have picnics and stuff.
Out in the center of the lake had a huge dance hall, skating rink, and some of the big bands that later became big bands played there for dances at Lake Olympia, and then the roller skating rink was open most of the time when they weren't there.
I mean, Lake Olympia was popular. It was a place where people would go to have picnics and have, they'd had canoeing and had a nice time on the lake. They had a big trapeze swing. You could swing out over the lake, drop in. There was a concrete swimming pool on the other side, and they'd had dances and roller skating on the lake there, on that big round building that was there.
Lake Olympia's dance hall had a sprung floor. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not, but there's big springs all around underneath the store. And particularly when you're roller skating with the organ music playing, and it starts to undulate a little bit, and you kind of go around and float around all around the store. It was really very interesting.
You know, we didn't have enough money to go in the correct way and pay a quarter to go swimming, so we'd sneak in the back way and we'd swim in the lake on the backside. And that was a lot of fun. But then 1958, the roller skating rink where I learned to roller skate in the middle of the lake, you know, burned down. That sort of changed everything. It seemed like, I mean, the area was somewhat depressed with the mines closing down, and Lake Olympia was kind of the final blow that just sort of, that was it. You know, it was owned by former Grass Valley Police Chief Vince Sack. It was owned by his parents. And when the fire burned down their main source of income, which was the roller skating rink where they had the dances and everything, that was significant. It seemed like to me, I mean, it was 1958, I was 9 years old, because that cut off a big part of the entertainment of Grass Valley. I mean, it was like a destination. It was the destination, I think.
Nevada City was just a small town, lovable town. Everybody knew everybody. Actually, I don't think there was any bad things ever happening. I remember on Halloween we wrote on the Union office building with a wax candle, and we thought that was being very daring to do such a nasty thing to them.
It brings up a story. I remember one great story that it always comes to mind. It used to be where Java John's is now, used to be a liquor store years ago. And I was like 16 or something, and I went in there to buy some alcohol. And because I thought, you know, I looked pretty old, and I was tall, and I could get away with it. Well, I was almost ready to get away with it, and Officer Don Duncan walked in. And he sized up the situation just like that.
I remember that name.
And he came up and he goes, "How you doing, Mick?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing good, Don." And the guy behind the counter is looking at me and looking at him, and I'm like, he pulls out some tobacco, and he goes, "Want to chew?" And I went, "Oh, sure." I've never smoked. I didn't do. Anyways, I took a big glob of it and put it in my mouth. I must have turned green and purple. And he's just like looking at me, and he's just being all everything. And I just kind of said, you know, I'm going to come back and get this stuff a little later. Got out the door as quick as I could and got this stuff out. I looked back and they were laughing. That was the kind of town it was, okay? Yeah. Where the police, instead of trying to arrest you, they actually worked with you, and it was a good lesson because I didn't try it again.
Well, as a young kid, my mother had a beauty shop on Commercial Street. She was 4 generations born in Nevada City, and her maiden name was Randall, Claire Randall. And at that beauty shop, all my school teachers got their hair done there. So from kindergarten to the 4th grade, my mother knew more about what I did during the day than I knew.
I used to walk all the way across downtown Grass Valley from Grandview Terrace, and you didn't dare get in trouble on the way to school or on the way home because everybody knew everybody, and your mom always knew that you were in hot water before you even got home.
When I was 9 years old, delivering papers, my first route was down Richmond Street, Washington Street, Broadview Height, which my aunt used to call Pill Hill because when they first built, that's when all the doctors lived.
There's one thing that all 12 of us Mal children did. 4 things. We all went to Mount St. Mary's. We all went to St. Patrick's Church. We all worked for Mal Paint and Glass. And we all delivered the Union newspaper. 12 of us, all one after another, delivered that paper in the same route. We used to call it Route 1107. And our route was from Arch Brooks's down to B&C True Value, which is B&C Lumberyard in those days, and then all the neighborhoods in between. So that was our claim to fame.
My sister used to walk around every once in a while until I got to Nob Hill and High Street and bought her a candy bar, and that's the last I saw her. She was gone. She got her candy bar.
On recess time, we played ante over. Now, I'm not exactly sure what it was that we threw over, but my sister Lois threw something over the well and hit Tito Silicani, and he cut his head. And she was so frightened, instead of running into the school teacher, she ran home to Mom and said, "I killed him, I killed him, I killed him." And so anyway, that was the big experience of the school. So after that, Andover was a kind of a more cautious game.
There was a huge water tank up on this property. It seemed huge to me. When you're 7, 8 years old, everything seems huge, but there was this big water tank up there. We'd climb up there, you know, and goof around and then get down, ride our bikes down this dusty road that the dust would be just flying like crazy. One day we got caught. We were up there and we see this guy walking over there, and I guess it was Mr. Litton. I've never met him since, but he walked us into this office. There was, I don't know, 3 or 4 of us kids. You know, with a big family, you're pretty much stuck together, and you know, you had a few friends, but it was mostly family. He walked us in there, and I remember this stern guy goes, "Are you the Mel kids?" "Yes, sir." "You want me to tell your dad what you're doing?" No, sir, don't do that. No, don't. We'll do anything. We'll work for you, whatever you want, but don't tell our dad." We knew we'd get a whooping for, you know, being up in that water tower.
We had to walk everywhere. We wanted to go someplace or ride our bikes. We didn't have helmets in those days, but we were still getting wrecks. Our heads were still there. We always had to walk to Memorial Park, an old swimming pool before we built a new one. Friday night, we always go to the show. And we were rowdy kids in those days. They had to stop the show, and the manager would have to get up there to tell us to behave, or they would shut down the theater and we would have to leave.
Tell Julie that story. You were in so much trouble.
I was in terrible trouble.
Yeah.
We did a lot of bicycle riding as children. Everybody had a bicycle. I lived on, it was the old Donnieville Highway. And so we got on our bikes. It was just before dinner time, and decided we'd ride down to the Yuba River. And so we went all the way down to the Yuba River, and then we started back home, and then we came across this flume. And I said, "Oh, this is great. We'll get on this flume, and it'll come right behind the house, and it'll save us so much time." Well, it did not go in the direction I thought. It got dark, and we were pushing our bikes on this, and there must have been some kind of moonlight, because I don't know how we did it. We found later there were 50-foot drops, and we finally got to a light in the distance, and it was the ditch tender's home, and we went up there and knocked on their door, and they took us in. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and they fed us and called my parents, and my mom and dad came and got us, and
I love that story.
It's a great place to grow up. And especially as boys, you just have all this country to romp in and do what you want. But Fred was right. We always had our chores to do. And we had to do the chores before we could go do the romping or whatever, exploring or whatever.
I think it was a real sense of community that everybody kind of knew everybody. I had some of the same teachers that my mom and dad had when they were in school. You know, now I even run into people that were in my Brownie troop, you know, kids that you grew up with. It was a really good place to be a kid.
You know, we had free reign of everything. There was the mine roads out there, and there was the Spring Hill mine, but occasionally there was a caretaker there that would run us off. Most of the time not. So we pretty much, you know, other than occasionally a car go by on the mine roads, we'd have free reign of the place. And just outside our house, probably 20 feet away, were the thickest manzanita bushes growing together that I've ever seen.
And my husband had the Giants Little League baseball team from the time they were babies, and took the same team all the way through until they were into, let's see, Babe Ruth, and then the next one after that. And in those days, if you had one child, say from the Baker family, all the Baker families were on the same team. So we were lucky we had a boy named Jim Mowell. So we had lots of Mowells on our team.
We actually had tunnels that you'd have to get on your hands and knees and go through the manzanita bushes for maybe 100 feet and then come out on the other side, and you know, then there was a field out there. And in this field, we set up a baseball diamond. We had to clear some of the brush away.
It was just so much fun to watch them from barely able to hold up a bat to nice, big, tall young men, 14 and 15 years old.
You know, we had our own baseball diamond. We had the field. Further on, we had what we called Bullet Hill, where we'd go out and practice shooting. Imagine doing that now. It was probably right where the freeway is where that little hill was that we shot into. And then beyond that, we had an underground fort, and then a tree fort that we used to go play in all the time. I mean, it was like a Huck Finn growing up, you know. It's just unbelievable now. You look at the area. But
at that time, we lived down in the Bay Area and were city folks, and coming here was very much coming to the country. I mean, my granddad, as I say, had poultry and dairy cows and goats and horses and all this stuff that kids love. So it was a good early connection.
Cattle drives were huge. We would take cows from up at Columbia Hill and up above that, Bloody Run, that way, and bring them all the way down to Smartsville. So all traffic out on Highway 49 there would stop for a while the cows went by, and you'd have a whole day of it. It was 2 days,
right?
2 days to get there. You just, you know, traffic would just stop all along North Columbia Road. What's the
come down that, and then we would come down over
French Corral
through Bridgeport,
over across the
covered
bridge there.
Always remember the cattle running across the Bridgeport Bridge, how that the bridge would jump up and down. And it always amazed me that in the early days that the engineering, the people were smart enough to be able to build a bridge out of wooden timbers like that. In those days, they must have had some very sharp individuals that knew how to engineer to build a bridge like that.
We enjoyed it, but I got to say, for me, at the end of the day, after doing that, you've been to rock concerts before where your ears are ringing. Well, instead of your ears ringing, you'd hear literally, it'd just be ringing in your ears, the sound of the cows. So
there was a brand that my great-grandfather had registered in California, and it was JR. So they let it go delinquent when they got rid of the numbers of cattle that they were running. And so my father, who was born in 1914, somewhere in the 30s or in there, when he might have been late 20s, when he started getting back into cattle and started getting a few cattle, he went to register a brand. So he tried to get the JR brand back that his grandfather had run so many years. Well, it was taken up, and it was taken up by the Robinson's Ranch. So they still run the JR brand. But it was originally Jim Reeder, and it was, if not the oldest, one of the oldest registered brands in California. And my dad was awful disappointed when he couldn't get it back. So then he registered FR for Francis Reeder, and that was his name. And they cut the J off the branding iron and put the F on, but the R, and we still use it today, Fred runs the brand today, the R is the original R that was on the JR brand from the 1800s.
You know, they were big cattle drives, right? I mean, not exactly through town. I don't remember any through town, but I think they went from Penn Valley area where they started, kind of out Newtown Road, and then from where the Willow is, 49 up north, they would drive them right up the highways. And that, you know, I remember getting stuck in a traffic jam and having all these cattle go by.
The freeway was a big change, a very large change, because there was definitely sides that were against it, and it kind of tore even families apart. They didn't agree about what was going on. But I can't imagine trying to get between Grass Valley and Nevada City today without the freeway.
This town, Grass Valley, Nevada City area in the 50s was pretty dead. Nobody knew where Grass Valley was outside the area, it seemed like. And the roads to Auburn and Marysville were windy, and it took a long time to get anywhere.
The freeway took out the, I think it was called the Nevada City Sanatorium. Can't think of the woman who ran it, but my mother was born there in Nevada City. and so was their brother Vincent. And of course, the freeway took that out.
Of course, I've lived here all my life. I was born in Nevada City in a little sanitarium right in the middle of the freeway, of course, before the freeway was built.
Grass Valley, they just took out streets, whole streets of small frame houses where families lived, Bush and Blake, and down close to the end of where the railroad ended.
The freeway, when they were building first starting to build the freeway, they came out and they staked everything. They staked where everything was going to be. And that was our backyard they were staking. So we went out there and we pulled up all these stakes. We brought them in and put them in a shed in our backyard. And so about a month later, we go out and they're re-staking these things. So we pulled them all up again, put them in the shed. And about 2 months later, a month later, they come back and they put stakes in and they took chalk and they made X's where all that was. So you can imagine, I mean, it took us half a day to pull those stakes up and move all that chalk out of the way so they couldn't tell where they were. We did not want, mostly my older brother, I gotta blame him, Tom. He did not want freeway in his backyard.
Nevada City change was really hard for me, the freeway coming in, things like that. That was really tough, and I was a bit of a prankster, you know, going and putting sugar in gas tanks and things like that. I, of course, didn't do any of that, but we really didn't like it.
The company that originally started the freeway went bankrupt, and I feel a little guilty that we may have been part of the cause of that, but, and so they didn't, it stopped actually the freeway construction for about 2 years. So it wasn't until I was probably a senior in high school, I graduated in 1968, that they actually got the freeway going through, because I remember driving on the gravel part when we weren't supposed to, and you know, and I just got my license.
The first contractor I know went broke building the freeway, and another one had to come in and finish it. And of course, it's hard to everybody believe that all of the traffic coming down Highway 49 or on Highway 20 went over the roads that were here, and that's in the days when there was maybe 12 sawmills in the area and an awful lot of trucking. All went over those roads without any problems.
All we really and truly wanted from a new road between Grass Valley and Nevada City were some turnouts so that we didn't have to follow the lumber trucks all the way and be late for work. Because like many people, you lived in one town and worked in the other one. And I lived in Nevada City at that time and worked in Grass Valley. It took 20 minutes to half an hour sometimes to get the 4 miles to Grass Valley.
When they were building the freeway, when Dad would get off of work and in the early evening we would get in the Jeep and we would go down and cruise the freshly graded dirt of the freeway down to Brunswick, and then we'd get off and take the old highway and come back.
I remember when that went in, because I remember it was a big deal to go on a ride down the freeway when it opened. That was like, if you behave, we'll take you in a car ride.
Yeah.
We only had 2 TV stations or something back then. There wasn't a lot to do, so you made up, you know, the stuff.
Of course, the one in Nevada City we called the Big Ditch because it was a ditch for a long time, full of water, because they dug it out and let it settle, I guess. I remember one Sunday afternoon I came to town and there were people who were digging in the mountains of dirt over there, and they were looking for bottles. And they put a stop to it right that day because they were afraid these people who were down 5 and 6 feet in a hole in the ground, it would cave on them and they'd have problems.
Dr. W.P. Sawyer from Nevada City was called, and he came out to attend to all of us. First of all, he delivered the baby, which happened to be me. He brought a midwife along with him, which was Mrs. Tonella, and he handed me, who apparently was very small, to Mrs. Tonella and said, "Take care of her, she's not going to live." And she said, "Oh yes, she will." So in those days, of course, it was very hot and no other heat other than a wood stove. So she went to the kitchen, so I was told, built up a big fire, got a basket, put this little tiny me in the basket and on the oven door. she said to the doctor, "I will be feeding her sugar and brandy." And he said, "What?" She fed me sugar and brandy, I suppose, for many days. And here I am, 95 years old later, very healthy, and thanks to Mrs. Tonella.
My mother was pregnant with the number 6 child, which happens to be me. So they started or took over Malpaint and Glass in 1949. And then I was born August of that year, and they took over in April. And it was a struggle. They struggled quite a bit because my dad knew nothing about the glass business. But he didn't worry too much because the guy that worked there knew all about glass. He was a great glass man. So he figured that was an employee that could teach him how to do it. Unfortunately, when they bought the shop, the guy decided he didn't want to work for my dad, and he moved across the street and opened his own glass shop and was a pretty fierce competitor for, from then on until he died many years later after I owned the business, and they closed the store down.
My dad and one other person, and I forgot his name right now, started the Sierra Memorial Hospital. And he knew he needed a bigger hospital, and they purchased the land up where the Sierra Memorial Hospital is now. And of course, there wasn't very much money around. Money was scarce in those days, so I can remember another logger, the Graham Brothers loggers, and ourselves went over there with our tractors and did all the land leveling for the Sierra Memorial Hospital. And it was all done for just free gratis to get the hospital going. So
the naming of the county library for me was a total surprise. I happened to be at a Board of Supervisors meeting one morning, and it was proposed by the Truckee Board of Supervisors member. And then one of the supervisors said, "Well, usually they're dead." I love that. I'm also named on the drive. It's Helling Drive. The library's on Helling Drive. Gene Albaugh I had gone to him that previous spring and said, "Gene, I have to have a new address to change in all our publications and everything." So he said, "Well, we're naming the street after you." I said, "Oh, Gene, I had asked for Library Drive, Library Circle or something." "No, we're going to do that." Well, now that was so nice of him. That was so nice of him. Now, my conclusion was that he didn't tell the supervisors he was going to do this, and they didn't tell him they were going to do the other. So that's how I ended up with both. So I went back to Gene and I said, "Gene, don't you think it's a little much to have the street and the library?" I said, "I'd rather have the library."
Many years ago, there was not a Little League baseball field. Our children were starting to all play Little League and little teeny tots, and we thought, well, they were down on the lower field, and we thought, no, this isn't right. So all the guys got together, and the surveying was done free of charge. Chick Thomas, who lived over on Park Avenue, had some sort of a little vehicle that he drove that would level the field. We raked, women raked, we threw rocks, we made piles, we leveled it all off. It was all totally done by people who wanted their children to be able to play baseball. And the fence, the wire was donated, everything was donated. We all worked like crazy for weeks and weeks.
There was a fire chief, first and second assistant, and their wives were responsible for answering the fire phone. And they would get an operator on the phone and say, "Stay with me, it's a fire call." And then they would start calling all the volunteer firemen. And their response time was incredible. Throughout the United States, the insurance companies set insurance rates based on response times. And ours were always the lowest you could have for a town of our size with a volunteer force.
We were at St. Patrick's Barbecue at Lions Lake, and there was a call over the loudspeaker that, "Bill Malley, you better get to your shop, there's a fire." And so we made it to the bottom of the hill at East Main, and they stopped us, and so the whole store went up in flames and just totally destroyed So that was a tough blow because there was no insurance. Made barely enough money to feed the family, but not enough to pay the insurance man. So the next Monday morning, we came down and started cleaning up. Excuse me. And then so people heard about it, and immediately the Knights of Columbus, Hanson Brothers, anybody that, and everybody came over and started. They helped us clear it out, built the building. Johnny Pontic, the glass man that went across the street, was over, helped pound nails to build this building. So the community helped keep Metal Painted Glass in business, because they would have never made it otherwise. And that's something, that's a debt that I don't think we can ever pay, but every year I try a little more.
I consider myself very lucky to have grown up in Nevada County. I go to high school reunions and I talk to my classmates who couldn't wait to get out of here, and now they can't wait to get back.
This is a really fine community. We're all very lucky to be here. It's well managed, it's got good people, and it's just a great place to be.
I've traveled all over the world and stayed and worked in Europe a lot for many years. And I never expected to want to be in Nevada City. It was just, well, you're going to move away and that's what you do. But once you get out and see the world, Kelly's traveled as well, you realize how special this place is.
I was in the service in Texas, which I didn't like, Vietnam I didn't like. But here, you know, as soon as you come in, you can smell the pine tree. If you're away for a while, you're used to those pine trees now.
I've been able to travel all around the world, and I've seen a lot of wonderful places. I have not seen any place that I would want to call home more than Grass Valley, Nevada City.
What's the best part about living in Nevada County?
I don't know, but I sure love it. I always have.